I did it all for the money. When a player had to eat, that one a damn thing funny. Hey, I did it all for the money. Hey, I did it all before. Rob people so dope. Gang banging, shooting pistols, running from the dance folks. And I was known for eating anything your ass folks. Soft, hard, green, brown, niggas even had throat. Welcome to the Playing with the Church Money podcast. I'm your host, Brother Will Williams. And today we're going to keep talking about the current cases that are going on in the United States right now. We're going to touch on a few of the inconsistencies. One of the things I like to point out on my shows, and it just we're going to point out a few inconsistencies and the double standards that there seems to be when it comes down to dealing with our kids and our youth. As I spoke one of my previous podcasts about double standards when it comes down to courts and the judicial system and police reform. So one of it's very interesting. It's kind of all playing out right in front of our faces, but I think people are kind of desensitized to it all, so people don't tend to pay attention to some of the details in basically what's going on right in front of your face. Right now you have the Kyle Rittenhouse case and the Ahmaud Arbery case that just happened, headlined in the news, and you have other court proceedings that also happened here locally. So you had the guilty verdict in the Darian Bashir case. You had a decision not to allow the Benny Hargrove shooter released from juvenile detention. So let's get into these two particular cases. I just want to point out the double standard it's right here, plain to see, people. But the one thing I just kind of want to point out, being that I've worked in mental health, being that I've worked with kids before, that there is hardly any consistency, and this now goes to show the inconsistencies in the judicial system, the inconsistencies in the policing of the community. Let's get into these two cases. Very hard to talk about, so I don't want anyone to feel like I'm exploiting the situation. By no means is that what I'm doing. I want to point out the differences, and we need to ask why. These are the things that we put these elected officials in place. So we need to know, why is there such a difference? What is the difference? Why is there such a difference in the treatment of our youth versus the treatment of adults? So we're going to go into these couple of cases that you have some younger offenders, people who are arrested and charged with these crimes. So you have and here locally, you're going to have Darian Bashir, Darian Mills, and then you're going to have the underage, the Benny Hargrove shooter at the Washington Middle School. I don't want to say the kid's name because he's underage, so I'm just going to leave it as the Benny Hargrove shooter. And then you have Kyle Rittenhouse. So these two in particular, the last two, both underage, completely different approaches to how they were seen by the public, the people who were supporting them. And so let's get into this. Let's talk about this. Why is there such a difference? So for people that always want to say, well, it's about, why you always talk about race, or we're talking about two kids that aren't black here. So you have Kyle Rittenhouse, an underage kid who went to Kennesaw, Wisconsin to quote unquote protect property from protesters. An underage kid who wasn't supposed to have a firearm. Plain and simple. There's no other way around it. He shouldn't have had the firearm. Now you have the Benny Hargrove shooter, middle school kid, want to say 12 or 13, takes a gun to school and is attempting to bully somebody. Benny Hargrove steps in to defend the person and gets shot and killed. Now, the Benny Hargrove shooter, they're not trying to release him. They are hiding him. You know, they gonna take you and put you somewhere. They ain't gonna find you for a long time, and that's what they're doing to this kid. Kyle Rittenhouse, however, and this is where politics comes into play, and this is where these judges and this is where these prosecutors need to be called out. They need to be called out for the bias, BS, and these are the things that we need to. When you want to talk about reform, justice reform, criminal reform, police reform, this is where you start. You start taking the names of these judges who make these asinine decisions that aren't consistent, and I'm going to point them out. I'm going to point out their responsibilities here in this whole case and the inconsistencies of these cases. But these judges need to be held accountable, just like police need to be held accountable for their actions, just like a criminal is held accountable for his actions. These are decisions that affect the lives of other people. So these people need to be held to a higher standard when they're making these decisions. Now, the only thing in common in both these cases was someone died. In Kyle Rittenhouse, I believe 2 people have died and other people were injured. In the Benny Hargrove murder, it was only the Benny Hargrove died. The judge decided to allow Kyle Rittenhouse to be released from jail. After he was released, the kid was in the bars. He was just the completely irresponsible. So this goes to the parents. This goes to the mother's irresponsibility. And why aren't these people being held accountable? The Benny Hargrove shooter took his father's unsecured firearm unannounced to his father and took it to school and shot someone. Kyle Rittenhouse traveled across state lines with the firearm that was supplied by an adult. That adult needs to be charged. His mother, knowing, I believe she drove him there, also needs to be charged with child abuse, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and so on and so forth. And any of you people, politicians, law officials that want to argue against this, you need to step down from your position because you know that is the letter of the law. But why do these people get preferential treatment? So when people start talking about white privilege and racism, you're giving them the fuel for that. Thank you. Now, why is there a double standard in these cases? Kyle Rittenhouse, they should have put him in jail just like they put in the Benny Hargrove shooter in jail. If the Benny Hargrove shooter isn't getting released, Kyle Rittenhouse shouldn't have been released. They're scrutinizing this man's father because he had a violent history and a gun crime that he was able to get out of. So they're scrutinizing his behavior and projecting that onto his son who killed Benny Hargrove. They're not doing the same thing to Kyle Rittenhouse mother or the person who supplied this firearm to Kyle Rittenhouse. And these are the double standards that go on in our country. One kid is the poster child for everything wrong in our city when it comes down to youth crime. The other guy is poster boy for gun rights. The only difference is one's Hispanic, one's white. So these are the inconsistencies when it comes down to dealing with the youth crime and the standards that we hold the youth to. There's a level, and it's going to seem very odd that I'm putting it in this way, but it's the truth. It's the truth. You can't have one way for one kid and then another way for another kid because he's the poster boy for a political party because they killed somebody from another political party. Very disgusting behavior. But this is what adults project onto their children nowadays. So you, as a parent, must be cognizant, be mindful of what you're projecting onto your kid. Don't be crying when he goes state to state and shoots somebody. Don't be crying when these type of issues happen because you're projecting this onto your kid. His mother contributed to him, drove him there to kill somebody. She should be on trial as well. So we have these children. One case is completely being handled like, I mean, I've never seen. It's real crazy. They do not want to prosecute this kid, Kyle Rittenhouse. And at the same time, these are the things that we need to discuss as a community. They don't want to prosecute this kid, but then the level of scrutiny that other kids like the Benny Hargrove shooter get is it's different. So let's just keep that in mind. There's two very different standards when it comes down to the treatment of these kids is portrayed, and the way that they're handled by the judicial system is disgusting. We are holding these kids to a higher standard. We are holding these kids to a higher standard than we are holding adults to. When you can put the Benny Hargrove shooter in jail and you can release Kyle Rittenhouse to go take pictures, to go party in bars where he's not even old enough to be in, though it's a clear double standard. But you have kids that are in prison with adults. You have kids that are in prison with adults for killing one person, but you have yet a revolving door for adults to get incarcerated after they kill someone and come back out. But you want to hold a 15-year-old person to a higher standard that you would hold an adult to. Perfect example. You have these two cases of these two kids. Now, there's way more cases of kids getting life in prison, kids being tried as an adult. We just had the group of kids who shot the bartender, and I believe two of the kids, one was like 13 or 14, and there was another kid, but they are getting charged as adults. Double standard. The men who are called judges and the men who are called prosecutors are cowards. Plain and simple. You are very cowardish because you will prosecute a child to the letter of the law, but yet when someone from January 6th, you have these people that are getting slaps on the wrist. Someone died in the commission of a crime. Several people died in the commission of a crime. I don't see none of these people being charged with this. None of these people being charged with this. Yet and still, there's so many juveniles who are sitting in a car when someone decided to commit a crime who are in jail for longer periods of times. And this is what needs to be called out. This is where I'm not defending Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm not defending the Benny Hargrove shooter by no means. What I am saying is the standard of scrutiny that are placed on youth versus the standard of scrutiny that's placed on adults is disgusting in the judicial system. It's playing out right in front of us. You have, I want to say her name was like Ashley Babbitt. She died at the Capitol trying to storm in. She's the one who got shot in the window. All those people who are trying to break into that, all those people should be charged with that murder because it was in the commission of a crime. You were breaking into the Capitol when someone got killed. The people that got trampled by their own people, you people are responsible for trampling these people. So why aren't all of these adults being held to that higher standard? And this is where it's just so sloppy and inconsistent. This is where a new reform. We've had these laws on the books for years, but it's the execution of the way the judicial system is handled. It's the execution of the judges, the judgment of some of these judges. We must have some kind of oversight to call these judges out on their BS. When you have the judge in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, I was watching this. So he tells the prosecutors, you cannot use Kyle Rittenhouse's social media post when he's posted a picture of himself with a bar partying and stuff like that. They did not want him because to show that his disregard for what he did, and he's out there celebrating his post murder. He's celebrating with these people. They're celebrating with this kid and putting him on a pedestal. They didn't want to allow the posting of Kyle Rittenhouse's social media post, but in that same court, in the same trial, he allowed the defense to call one of the victim's friends who made a social media post about what he wanted to do or what he would have done or should have done in the moment of all that going on. So the judge allowed them to call this guy, but didn't allow them to talk about the. And so these are the inconsistencies. If you must pay attention. People don't pay attention. We need oversight. Like I said, we must have these safeguards for these judges so they can't get away with this stuff. You have that within itself is just, I mean, what else can you say? What else can you say? But you want to hold these other kids to a higher standard. Now you have these kids on trial. How many of the January 6th people have died there also? More than in Kennesaw. But you're not going to have these people on trial like you're doing this kid. Like I said, I'm not defending him. But these people committed a crime. Someone died in the commission of a crime. They should be held to that higher standard. All these adults knew better. As adults, they knew better. But here is a child who is bought a firearm, being influenced by his mother, who has no life because you're driving your son somewhere to shoot somebody. What kind of, this is ridiculous. If it would have happened in any, as a matter of fact, you had a case in Orlando. You had a rapper in Orlando called Queso. His dad drove him to do a drive-by or drove him somewhere where somebody got killed. You know who's in prison right now? Him and his son. So that's the difference. There's a whole lot of inconsistencies. Underage child drives across state lines with the firearm and shoots somebody. If it would have been someone from Chicago who did that, if it would have been a black kid and a black mother from Chicago who did that, what would have been the difference? And why aren't the adults from the January 6th, why aren't these adults being held to that same scrutiny? Why is that? So this is where I call the judges cowards, because they will take a child and hold him to a higher letter of the law, but they will slap an adult on the wrist. And very disgusting. Very disgusting. And I've talked about this when I talked about working at the group home, how, the encounter with the police officer and what he told me he was going to do with the child. It's a culture. It's a culture, and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to. It's like a grown kid that don't want to be chastised. We got to pay attention to these things. It's a great injustice that we allow our kids to be treated this way. We allow this. Even as you look on the news media outlets, people are cheering for this kid to go to jail. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I am not defending Kyle Rittenhouse. But it's just the optics of it. When people want to talk about police reform, well, and justice reform, well, it's a sensitive subject, but it needs to be discussed from both sides, from the victim side, from all three sides, the people who victimized, the people who are victims, and the law enforcement aspect of it. All of this needs to be looked at and dealt responsibly. When I'm sorry, but you have this politician, I'm not going to say her name, but they came out and they want to get $20 million to create an office to do studies on gun crime. So I'm gonna jump on my soapbox real quick. I'm gonna give you my and this is what's wrong with our state. You have people that want to take $20 million from a poor state to do research. How about we take those $20 million? Here's my political soapbox. So when you see a politician using this idea, you know where it came from. You know who came up with the solution for this. Take the $20 million You got your neighborhood associations. You got the cities divided up in 4 sections, which can be divided up into more sections. So you take these neighborhood organizations, these neighborhood associations, and you take the activist community and you take social workers and you take a percentage of what you're going to basically the workforce you're going to use from the city, and you get with the community organizers and you take that $20 million, and now you have a 24-hour tracking for people that are on ankle monitors. You have an eye in the community where you can have people systematically keep an eye on your community. It's called community policing. So you have people, and just like before when the police used to march through the neighborhoods, except this time it's going to have to be the people from the community. It's going to have to be the people from these neighborhood organizations. It's going to have to be some of the kids. It's going to have to be some of the adults, because this is the only way we're going to clean up our neighborhoods. So you take that $20 million, instead of studying, you actually put it into action, where we're tracking the people in our neighborhood who are on ankle monitors. We're tracking the people who are in our neighborhoods who are selling the drugs, who are dealing the guns. That way we know who's in our neighborhood. And it's a less of a burden on the people that don't want to come out and do their job because their union president is tying their hands behind their back, making them seem incompetent. So if the APD can't police the crime, the community can police the crime. It's just these people want to make everything about politics. You take that $20 million, I guarantee you'll have community policing like that. You divide that 5 million, you divide that 5 ways between northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest, and you get it organized and you take care of the crime that way. You have people out there community policing. You don't need to have militias. And if the guy from IPS, if the owner from IPS can get drugged through the mud by APD when he was a Los Lunas police officer, they ruined this man's career. He came back and built IPS Protective Services. They will come out quicker than the police. This man has single-handedly created his own policing force for the community. And they will actually come out. So if you take the budget that the police has and you gave it to Sean Jones, the owner of IPS, I guarantee you there would be a better system than what they have now, with no police union president to politicize every move. I can guarantee you that these systems will supersede the systems that the police use, that they don't want to relinquish. They don't want to change their culture. They don't want to change their behavior. They just want to cash out and kill people and beat people up and stuff. They don't want to change the behavior. So you take that $20 million that Democratic politician asked for and divide that between a community, 5 million. I guarantee you 5 million goes a long way to curb crime when you're giving it directly to the people who are going to be working in that community. You have in the International District Alex Horton dealing with the International District Economic Development Center. So right there's a perfect hub, a perfect base where you can organize. So 5 million going to that place, and you have people already that are right there. He is in the heart of where the problem is. So you have organizations that are in these communities. You have people that are based out of Barelas, in the South Valley. You have organizations all over. In the International District, you have multiple organizations that can come together. That 5 million would go a long way for those organizations to actually create work, to actually create change. You have that combined with the mental health aspect, and you have a workforce. You can go and you can be out there, and you can create change. But if you're going to politicize everything and act like there's no kind of reform that's needed, we will not have any kind of change. And that's what you're seeing unfold right now in front of you. The inconsistencies in the Kyle Rittenhouse case, with the way the judge and the whole proceeding is handled, the Ahmaud Arbery case, the way the whole proceedings are being handled, the way Kyle Rittenhouse was allowed to freely go, oh yeah, you get on out of here, boy, get out of here, stay out of trouble. Benny Hargrove's shooter, he's not getting out of jail. So I don't want no one to feel like I'm defending these guys. I'm just pointing out the inconsistencies when it comes down to the justice system. And these are things that just need to be pointed out. I'm not just going to point it out when it's somebody from our community, because there's other communities also that are affected by the same behavior that our community is subjected to. The same injustices our community is subjected to. You have this projected on other parts of the community. And usually it's juvenile offenders get the worst end of the stick. So when you the same treatments you see a lot of black people get, these are the same things that they'll do to juveniles. You know, they'll throw a juvenile, a 16-year-old girl who was getting raped and killed her rapist, in jail for life, but they'll let a sex offender out to commit more crimes. Even better example, you know, they'll throw the 6th out. Then there's the one sister, they just released her, but you know, she was a 16-year-old girl, 15-year-old girl. She was getting raped for a couple years and she killed her rapist. They put her in jail for life. She just got released. However, you have these priests. Yeah, this going there. We have all these priests in New Mexico who were molesting kids. You had the guy who they were moving around. He ended up like in Belen just recently, and they moved him out there. He was like at St. Mary's in Belen. They were hiding him out there. He was doing stuff, molesting people. You had a bunch of priests. They were molesting people, but yet and still, you don't see these guys on trial. They don't drag their face. They don't show them on a stand like they're doing these kids, and that the media should be ashamed of themselves, because this is what you should be doing as well. So you have these people who, the archdiocese, they had to sell off property to settle these rapist case. People came together because they were going to sell off St. Pius. People came together and put money to save that. Now this I cannot fathom. This is something completely disgusting, because if you have these type of institutions that were doing this to the community, just burn it down and rebuild a whole new one. That campus doesn't have no sentiment. It has sentimental value to you, but those kids that were being raped in there, what do you think the value of that building standing means to them? If you really want it to mean something, why raise that money to save that damn campus, crush it and build a new one, maybe name the gymnasium after some of the victims, and, you know, do something to honor the victims instead of trying to honor the institution that allowed it. So these are the things in society it's just we're as a people, we have a lot of issues, and we never look out for the best interest of the kids. You have all these adults that raise this money to save St. Pius, no complete total disregard for anything that happened to those kids. And this is how society leans towards youth. This is how society deals with kids. It has to change, and unfortunately, black people, a lot of times we end up being at the forefront for change, because we get subjected to a lot of this injustice. But it happens across the board. Other races and juveniles systematically have had no voice. It's like they end up being the default. When black people were at the bottom of the totem pole, now it's women and children, you know, or females and children. So it's kind of disgusting. It's disturbing, but pay attention, people, because this is how your kids are subject. This is what your kids will be subjected to. This is what they think about your kids and the youth in the future. So when you kids are out there and you're being pumped with all this political BS and they trying to sway you a certain way, just be mindful. They don't have any kind of best interest for you. You're the garbage millennials. You see how they talk about millennials. So what do you think they're going to be talking about you? And this is just the behavior of people. Don't really realize you're ostracizing an entire group of people by pushing your narrative so strong. And that's what we saw with the whole Trump era. They ostracized Muslims, Mexicans, immigrants, women. I mean, it was just disgusting. So now when people don't want to go work for these people and people are looking at a whole different level of thinking, they don't understand why people don't want to come work for them. Well, maybe if you weren't supporting the jackass for 4 years and pushing his talking points, maybe those people will come and work for your jobs. You know, if they didn't see you, you know, it goes back to like the Enron people. You know, when you wouldn't have this Antifa and all these groups out in Seattle if you didn't have like the whole Enron situation. Not to say that it wasn't always a hotbed for, you know, civil unrest in that area, but a lot of these people are the Enron, the children of the Enron parents who got screwed by their pension and their retirement funds and their college funds and stuff like that by the whole debacle with Enron. So now these people have developed into like the anti-fascists. You can't blame them because they parents were drugged through the mud. And see, these are the things that happen. People tend not to study real world events and real world things, but you have to pay attention to what's going on because it'll affect you some one way or another. It'll come back. So pay attention to the way they're handling these kids in these court cases because it's very important. It's very important to see the inconsistencies, especially you people that are out here pushing for reform and change. So Stephanie Myers Diaz, here's a perfect example. Stephanie Myers, here's an example. I'm pointing out some key inconsistencies. You're not going to want to defend some of this stuff sometimes. You're not going to want to look at some of this stuff sometimes, but you have to defend it when it comes down. You have to use it to defend your argument because you can't overlook that inconsistency and that injustice. So Kyle Rittenhouse did what he did, and the case will go through the court system as it is, and we'll see what the outcome is. The people who killed Ahmaud Arbery, these are adults who are just so shady, but we're going to see. It's going to be a lot of, I just hate to say, but I just don't feel like justice is going to be served. I just don't feel like justice is going to be served. These cases are almost at their conclusion. So we will see. We'll see. We'll keep you updated and posted on what's going on. But that's just my point of view on how I see it and what is actually going on. That's what's going on. I'm not making this up. You can tune into these cases. You can look at what's going on. You can go back and study, read, observe. You tell me. If kids are not held to a higher, you have more kids who have committed one murder, go to prison for years than you had adults who committed those same crimes. You have had adults get off for 4 years, 5 years, 3 years, 7 years on technicalities, or just that was what they pled out to. But given this current situation, let's just point out, because this is what we're dealing with, the atmosphere that we're dealing with. So you're dealing with these kids who are not being held to the same standard. When you see the January 6th people and multiple people died, they're not being held to the same standards as these kids. So let's just pay attention to that. Stop playing with the church money, and y'all stay blessed.
I did it all for the money. Hey, I did it all for the money. When a player had to eat, that one a damn thing funny. Hey, I did it all for the money. Hey, I did it all before. Rob people sold dope, gang banging, shooting pistols, running from the dance folks. And I was known for eating anything you asked for.